Welcome to this explainer. Let's just jump right in, because today we are unpacking one of the most heavily debated, truly pivotal events in all of human history. We're going to examine the converging historical forces that culminated in the first, and thankfully the only, use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. Our goal today is to look directly at the facts, the timelines, and the incredibly complex strategic decisions that led to this unprecedented moment, just so we can truly grasp the scale of what happened. To even begin to understand the immense gravity of August 1945, we first have to confront a pretty staggering number: 150,000 to 246,000. That's the estimated total number of people killed by these two bombs by the end of that year alone. And it's important to note that most of these casualties were civilians. Roughly half of these deaths happened on the very first day of the bombings. For months afterward, many more succumbed to the horrific effects of burns, radiation sickness, and other injuries, effects that were only compounded by illness and severe malnutrition. It's a deeply sobering figure, but it really anchors our entire understanding of this event.
Now, this grim reality was actually preceded by the Potsdam Declaration. Back on July 26th, the Allies issued a stark ultimatum demanding the unconditional surrender of the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces. The message was essentially surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. But the Japanese government chose to ignore the ultimatum, and that decision set the final gears of the atomic attacks into motion.
Part 1. The Secret Race, the Manhattan Project.
So the story of the bomb actually starts years earlier, rooted in a very specific fear back in 1939, the terrifying thought that Nazi Germany might build a nuclear weapon first. Driven by a recent theoretical breakthrough in nuclear fission, the American response was just monumental. The Manhattan Project, directed by Major General Leslie Groves, cost over $2 billion. To put that into perspective for a second, that's equivalent to about $28 billion today. This top-secret operation employed upwards of 125,000 people at its peak, spread out across dozens of sites. It was a massive, completely unprecedented mobilization of human, financial, and mineral resources, far outpacing the resources of Japan's own limited nuclear program.
Working under absolute secrecy, J. Robert Oppenheimer and his team at the Los Alamos Laboratory didn't just build one bomb. They actually went down two completely different scientific paths. You had Little Boy, which was a gun-type fission weapon using enriched uranium-235. And then, developed right alongside it, was Fat Man, a totally different, much more complex implosion-type weapon relying on plutonium-239. Both of these incredible and terrifying feats of engineering were developed concurrently.
Part 2. The Pacific Meat Grinder, the Cost of Invasion.
By 1945, we're entering the fourth year of the war, and American casualties are just mounting rapidly. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, they were absolute meat grinders. Upwards of 94 to 99% of Japanese defenders fought to the death rather than surrender. Yet despite this unbelievably fierce military resistance, Japan's domestic situation was collapsing entirely. The Allied blockade had drastically reduced their merchant fleet tonnage. There was a severe lack of raw materials, which was sending the war economy into a steep decline. On top of that, the 1945 rice harvest was the worst it had been since 1909, leading to widespread hunger and malnutrition. The reality for civilians was incredibly desperate, yet the military leadership was preparing to fight to the bitter end.
So, looking for a way to force an end to the war, the Allies started planning Operation Downfall. This was a massive two-part invasion of the Japanese mainland. Operation Olympic was set for October 1945 to take the southern island of Kyushu, followed by Operation Coronet in March 1946 near Tokyo. However, American intelligence, using decrypted intercepts, found out that Japan was fully anticipating this. They were preparing an all-out defense called Operation Kitsugo, mobilizing 2.3 million troops and a 28 million-strong civilian militia just to defend the home islands.
Because of that massive defensive buildup, U.S. military planners were looking at some truly terrifying math. Studies commissioned by the Secretary of War projected a chilling 1.7 to 4 million American casualties, with potentially up to 800,000 dead if Operation Downfall actually went ahead. The American public was war-weary, manpower reserves were running critically low, and military leaders were desperately looking for any way to decrease the cost in American lives.
And honestly, the cost for the defenders was looking even more apocalyptic. We're talking estimates of 5 to 10 million Japanese fatalities for that exact same invasion. That just highlights the truly catastrophic loss of life that Operation Downfall would have caused on both sides. The geography of Japan meant the invasion routes were pretty obvious, and the Japanese strategy was essentially to make the invasion so bloody that the Allies would agree to a negotiated peace rather than demand unconditional surrender.
Part 3. Fire from the Sky. The Air War. Faced with those apocalyptic invasion numbers, the United States escalated a devastating alternative strategy: the systematic aerial bombardment of the Japanese mainland. The core idea here was to destroy the enemy's war industries and undermine civilian morale before any troops ever set foot on Japanese soil. Initially, high-altitude precision bombing attempts from China and the Marianas completely failed due to logistics and Japan's decentralized manufacturing. But the crucial turning point came in January 1945. That's when General Curtis LeMay took command and completely changed tactics. He shifted the whole strategy to low-level area bombardment, using incendiary bombs which were specifically designed to burn down Japan's wooden infrastructure.
The absolute peak of this terrifying new strategy was Operation Meeting House. The firebombing of Tokyo on March 9th and 10th killed an estimated 100,000 people and destroyed a massive portion of the city in a single night. To this day, it remains the single deadliest air raid in history, worse than either of the atomic bombings. This destruction set a horrifying precedent. Over the next 6 months, the U.S. firebombed 64 Japanese cities, utterly devastating their urban infrastructure and leaving millions of people homeless.
Part 4. The Final Preparations. Okay, so how do these massive parallel forces, the ultra-secret atomic race back in the States and this devastating conventional air war in the Pacific, how do they finally converge? Well, the stage was set to deploy the weapons that had taken $2 billion to create, and the task of delivering them fell to a highly specialized unit. Colonel Paul Tibbets led the 509th Composite Group through rigorous, secretive training starting out at Wendover Field in Utah. Bombardiers conducted over 50 practice drops using inert or conventional explosive pumpkin bombs. Some of these missions were actually flown over Japan by single, unescorted bombers. The strategic goal there was to get the Japanese military accustomed to seeing small, unescorted bomber formations so they wouldn't sound the alarm or waste precious fuel trying to intercept them. Now, to pull off an unprecedented mission like this, standard bombers just weren't going to cut it. So the military deployed 15 specially adapted silver plate B-29s out to the island of Tinian. These heavily modified aircraft were tricked out with fuel-injected engines, reversible pitch propellers, and specialized pneumatic bomb bay doors to ensure the rapid, safe release of these heavy nuclear weapons.
Once the tech and the teams were locked in, they had to choose the targets. On July 25th, General Thomas Handy issued the final orders to target Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, and Nagasaki. What's absolutely crucial to understand about the selection rationale here is that these 4 specific cities were chosen precisely because they were large urban areas that also harbored major military installations. The plan was definitively set for direct military use rather than a remote demonstration.
And so all these converging timelines finally collided on August 6, 1945. The uranium gun-tight bomb Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. The immediate and lingering effects of the blast, the burns, and the radiation resulted in 90,000 to 166,000 deaths over the following months. And while Hiroshima did house a sizable military garrison of roughly 24,000 troops, it is a tragic fact that an estimated 90% of the dead were civilians.
Then, just 3 days later, before the Japanese high command could even fully process the sheer scale of the devastation in Hiroshima, the second strike hit. On August 9th, the plutonium implosion bomb Fat Man fell on Nagasaki. This strike killed an additional 60,000 to 80,000 people. Facing this unimaginable new reality, coupled with the Soviet Union's declaration of war and invasion of Manchuria on the very same day, Japan announced its surrender by August 15th. The horrific global conflict of World War II was finally over. Which really brings us to the enduring legacy of all of this. To this day, scholars, historians, and legal experts fiercely debate the justification for these bombings. Was this a tragic but ultimately necessary action to prevent the millions of casualties projected in Operation Downfall? An action that ushered in the long peace of the Cold War? Or were these bombings an unnecessary war crime that crossed a moral threshold, making the threat of a future nuclear holocaust a permanent shadow hanging over humanity? The historical realities are clear, but the ultimate ethical weight of this history is something we all must continue to grapple with. Thank you so much for joining me for this explanation.